Yet again, we appear to be in a situation where one of the Lorebeards in Lorebeards Fantasy has decided to just not turn up for one reason. It's almost like, I don't know, the fates are against us. Hello, my name's Andy Law, and welcome to Lorebeards Fantasy. You may note that I'm currently alone. As to where Ryan is, I'm not quite sure yet. If he turns up, then we will dive immediately and straight into Ar-Ulric, because today is the day of Ar-Ulric himself, the great leader, the highest priest of all within the cult of Ar-Ulric. However, Ryan isn't here yet. So as we wait for him, let's give a quick intro as to why I haven't been here for the past couple of weeks. Now, you may have noticed that Lorebeards over the last couple of weeks has been Ryan just turning up and going, Andy's not around, because I've been on holiday. I say holiday. It's been somewhat of a busman's holiday. Now, if you don't know what a busman's holiday is, it's a holiday where you're working. And I wasn't just working because I was tapping away on worky bits. I was also working because there was a convention over in Sweden, GothCon, that I'd been invited over to a degree. Lindsay, that's my wife and fellow Lorebeard, she does the book club. Lindsay invited herself. She got in contact with them and said, I'm desperate to go over to Sweden and have a look at Scandinavia, so can we come? And they were like, yeah, sure. So we went over and had an absolute ball. We had not just a good time because we sold out of Dark Deeds. And again, if you don't know what Dark Deeds is, do I have a copy here? I do somewhere, but it's sitting behind my curtain. Oh, here's one. I'm going to pull it out because I don't normally have a chance to say buy Dark Deeds. But buy Dark Deeds, people down in GothCon did, and we sold out, and it was brilliant. But not only that, I also got to meet some fellow Lorebeards. Now, you might be going, what? Well, normally when you go to conventions, you meet with, when you're a creator like myself who creates roleplay games, board games and the like, you meet with fans of the games, they ask questions about the games. I often end up discussing Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay, or I'm discussing Dark Deeds, or I'm discussing something I did for Critical Role or something like that. But this time, a different type of fan turned up, Lorebeards fans. And in particular, I'd like to call out 3 of them. The first I'm going to call out because they brought something for me. Now, as I turn it around, this is Swedish whiskey. Yeah! The Origin Sweden, a product of Sweden. If I bring that up there. Apologies if my camera's looking a bit poor this morning. I came back from my holiday and everything's got a bit low res. Apologies for that. I got myself 4 wonderful whiskies from Lars and Robin, who turned up. They are great fans of Lorebeards. They asked if I could pass on my kindest regards to Ryan, which I will do. Oh, wait a minute. Okay, wait a minute. I'm getting a message from Ryan. Give me a second. I'll be back with you in just a second. He is alive. Okay, I'll find out what's happening there. And anyways, I was saying, I met Lars and Robin, and we had an absolute ball having a quick chat about Lorebeards, what it was all about, the things that they'd seen, and that was great. I haven't been to cons and had people turn up for Lorebeards before. That was new, exciting, fun. We had a cool time, always good. So I'm going to be trying out these. It's going to be an absolute joy. And he asked, they both asked, in fact, if I could compare the Swedish whiskies with the Scottish whiskies, and sure, why not? So we got that. And second, when I was on the train, okay, cool. Ryan is currently uncertain. I'll get back to what Ryan's saying in a moment. On the train from Bergen all the way over to, I think we're going straight to Oslo with that train journey, which is a beautiful 8-hour train journey, 7 and a bit, across the mountains of Norway. I cannot recommend it enough. As train journeys go, it was only outclassed by a single other journey, which was the journey from Myrdal down to Flom, down in the fjords. It was just an hour. And it went from the highest peaks of Norway right down to the coastline. And in just an hour, you went down through some of the most beautiful terrain I've seen in my life. That all aside. While I was making my way across the mountains of Norway, someone was going along with their kid. And looked around and went, Adilo? And I went, hello? And as it turns out, another fan of Lorebeards was met on the train. And myself and Oyvind, I've almost certainly pronounced his name incorrectly. Apologies, Oyvind, if I have said it entirely wrong. Sat down and we chatted, and his family came over, and we played with his beautiful daughter. We had a terribly good time. We discussed Warhammer things, we discussed life, and long story short, we had an absolute whale of a time while we were on our train over towards our requisite destinations. So, yeah, my trip to Norway and also Denmark and Sweden was surprisingly punctuated with Lorebeards all the way through. We intended to do several Lorebeards when I was away, but the mics weren't working properly. And if you tuned into the episode that we did with Pancreas No Work over on his channel, so Ryan, myself, and Pancreas No Work did a big long chat about the different factions of Warhammer and what it'd be like to live with them. You'll notice my mic's a bit phasey and not necessarily great for that one. Do recommend that chat, though. We had a ton of good stuff to discuss. You'll find that over on Pancreas's No Work channel, where we had, I think, must have been about 4.5 hours worth of discussion about all the various factions. And we had some fun disagreements in that one as well as to exactly what it would be like to live in each one of these places. Hopefully, you all saw it. It was super cool. But beyond that, we've got today. Now, today is supposed to be Ar-Ulric, and we should be discussing the ins and outs of Ar-Ulric. I'm pretty convinced that Ryan won't be turning up, although he may change his mind. That being the case, I'm still going to do a bit of Ar-Ulric. Normally I'd go, let's just do a Q&A. But nah, screw that. Let's do a little bit of Ar-Ulric for a reason. Ar-Ulric is a character that has been used by Games Workshop in a host of different places, but is most famous for turning up inside one of the greatest campaigns ever written for role-playing games. That's The Enemy Within. It's also the campaign that I stream online with Lawhammer. So for those of you who don't know, which I presume won't be very many of you, but it's worth stating one more time, I do an actual play of The Enemy Within, playing Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay online, and we're at about episode 150 odd just now. We're nearing the end, and when I say the shit has just hit the fan in our game, I would be very much downplaying just how bad it's got. All manner of famous Warhammer characters and luminaries turn up in that. We've had everyone from Gotrek and Felix in there. Teclis made a very controversial appearance. We've had Magnus the Pious, the founder of the Empire, in there. Karl Franz, obviously, and more than one guise. We've had Boris Todbringer, a whole bunch of others. But beyond all of that, the entire campaign is hitched together by one of those core characters, which is Ar-Ulric, which is supposed to be the topic of today. Now, normally when we do our Lorebeards episodes, we dive into, I do an intro that dives into where that character came from and where it went. But this character is going to be, excuse me, I've just got to bring it up because so many people have been mentioning it all. I'll just bring up a single comment and just say, yes, I have had a haircut. And yes, my lower beard is somewhat less beardy. When I was over at the con, I thought it would be nice if I didn't look my normal hairy mess. So yeah, I cut myself down for GolfCon. And yeah, I'm relatively well shaven. Apologies for the low res of the camera. No idea what was up. I'll figure it out for the next time I do a stream. So thank you very much, Castrated and everybody else who was saying, hey, look, you're looking very dapper. Thank you very much. Anyway, yes. Welcome home, Andy. Not heard from Ryan yet. Oh, I've heard from Ryan multiple times. It's just today he's got some stuff he needs to deal with that arose unexpectedly. So it looks like I'm probably running solo, but I'm still going to dive into the topic of the day. And before I do that one as well, let's bring up Lars the Explorer. Cheers, good sir. Currently raising a glass of British whiskey in your honour. Scottish whiskey, I hope. British, Scottish, it's an important difference over here. Best regards from Lars. By the way, today is Robin's birthday. Well, Robin, happy birthday. In fact, happy birthday to you. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday, dear Robin. Happy birthday to you. And one more time, thank you very much for passing over the gift when we met over in GolfCon. It was super, super appreciated. Wadu, if you had to make an Empire army from Castle Reichsguard in the old world setting, what colors would you use in the state troops and knights? I'd use Altdorf state colors. That's blue and red, not white, as I sometimes say when I'm in stream doing Warhammer, because I'm an idiot. It's blue and red, and the blue and red colors mixed with the Reichsguard colors, which are very similar, would be perfect. So blue and red is the colors I would go for that one, definitely. Moving down to Darius. Hey, Darius, it's WrestleMania! Cody Rhodes versus Carl France, Garbrand versus Danhausen, Krokar versus Mrs. Lorebeards versus Dudley Boys versus Gotrek and Felix in a ladder match. Roman Reigns versus Greasus in tribal combat for Paul Heyman custody. You are desperate to tie Paul Heyman into Greasus and all of his ogre fun. Thank you, Darius. Greatly appreciated. Stephen Lucas, like to compare Magnus to Teddy Roosevelt. Interesting. I'd be interested to see your thesis there as to why you think they work so well together. I can think of some good bridges. Let me just also say thank you very much, Jonathan King, for being a member for 4 months. And thank you. I'm very, very glad to be back. And Scottish, how it says to me. It doesn't matter. Everybody makes that mistake. I'm not someone who's particularly precious about it. Am I someone who believes that Scotland would be better independent and part of the EU? Of course I am. Are we there? No. How are we suffering from Brexit and is our country slowly but surely going down the toilet? Yes. But hey, let's just not get concerned with real world politics. We were discussing Ar-Ulric. So I'm going to quickly go over a few things that I wouldn't go over if we were doing this as a standard Lorebeards episode, because Valgeir, the current Ar-Ulric, and the Ar-Ulric before him, his brother, because, hey, it's not a dynasty that runs the Ulrican cult, honestly, is a character that I've used so often in my own games that it's very hard for me to differentiate between the official lore for the character and the lore that I've created for my own games. And you might be a bit surprised to hear that, because clearly they're two very different things. But for me, they're sort of not. And there's a reason for that. I wrote a significant amount of the Warhammer Fantasy roleplay material for Ar-Ulric and the Cult of Ulric as a whole. For example, back in second edition of Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay, so this is the mid-2000s, I was responsible for writing all of the Ulrican material, all of it. In the Tome of Salvation, for example, which was a book about religion in the Empire, I was doing everything to do with Ulric in there. And that included Ar-Ulric, who he was, where he came from. That's basically, if you want a quick summary of what Ulric might be, he's the Pope of the Cult of Ulric, which is the god of winter, war, and wolves. And he's the leader of all of those. And I had to write all the material for that. And when we move through eventually the years and heading into Warhammer 4th edition for Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay, I was commissioning the books that were dealing with all of the material about Ulric. So I was telling the other writers what needed to be written. And a good chunk of that was explaining who Ar-Ulric was, who Emil Valgeir, the current Ar-Ulric, is, and how he became that. And a lot of that came from my own games, mixed in with the official lore that had already been written about Emil Valgeir. Because I had taken the official character who it was named originally inside the Storm of Chaos books, which means he was literally retconned out of Warhammer and then sort of ported back in again by different other writers. Because the Storm of Chaos, which was a big campaign event that was for Warhammer 6th edition a long time ago, back in the early 2000s, effectively had Archaon come down and have his ass handed to him. And Emil Valgeir was presented inside that book as the current Ar-Ulric of the Cult of Ulric. And that was written by Gav Thorpe for the Storm of Chaos book. And Emil had then been taken by others, added into other events, used by other characters, given some new art, which was super cool and funky. He's very, very clawful. And then I used that character in my own games to add in the extra depth that's required for roleplay. And when it came to writing the roleplay version, I mixed in a lot of what had been used in my games to provide context as to who he was, where he come from, what his family was like, who are the Valgeirs, exactly how did they reach the point where they were, how could they have effectively a dynasty in a place where a dynasty is impossible, and how did it all work. Cut a long story short, that all got garbled in my head. as in which parts were officially in documents that have been written by Games Workshop and published by them and their licensors, or published by one of their games, and the stuff that was just in my game. And the run-up to this stream was me not refreshing what I knew about Emil Valgir, because I know pretty much all of it. It was trying to pull out the bits that were published by Games Workshop and the bits that weren't and were just in my head. And that's sort of some of what I'm going to discuss right now. The bits that aren't really official and how this character had gained its extra depth. This is stuff that we won't really be discussing in the main episode. So when Ryan and I sit down and do this episode properly, we won't be discussing this part. But it is, I think, a fascinating aspect to how characters in Games Workshop are sometimes created, particularly on the roleplay side, because people who are playing the roleplay game have a completely different view to the Warhammer world to the people who are just playing the battle game or just writing it. Those who are just writing the game aren't really living in the game on a day-to-day basis. But people who roleplay inside Warhammer, they see that world week in, week out, as they're playing in the game. And when you play in a roleplay game, you often require much, much more depth than is required for a novel or a book, or indeed a computer game, because you've got to present the daily life, what happens inside this town, the next town, and the next town. And when you meet a character like, say, Emil Valgir, who is Ar-Ulric of the Cult of Ulric, and one of the PC asks the GM, hey, how did he become Ar-Ulric? How long has he been Ar-Ulric? Who's his dad? Does he have any sisters? What's his favorite horse? What the heck's going on here? Why does he look like that? You are posed as a GM with questions that the official lore doesn't have any answers for. And when a roleplay game comes along, a roleplay game writer comes along, if they've already created answers for their own games to these questions, when they then write the background for these characters into whatever book they might be writing for the roleplay game, they draw upon their own experiences. And that's exactly what happened when it came to a character like Emil Valgir in our version of how he was presented, which turned into, to a degree, the official version of it also. And I'm going to discuss a little bit around this subject as well for different variations regarding Ulric and how that god has changed slightly because of how it has been presented in books and how it then used by people. And then those uses have been backported into later books. Before I do that, let's grab another couple of comments, because we're not doing this as an official Lorebeardy episode, so I can literally pull out comments whenever I want to make sure they don't run out of control. First up, from Darius, also welcome back. Thank you very much, Darius. It's really nice to be back. There shouldn't be any more pauses for Lorebeards from this point onwards. Well, big ones. Lorebeards Fantasy should be running pretty regularly from this point onwards. At the beginning of the year, we obviously had the very sad passing of my dad, meaning that I was out for quite some time. I already had a holiday, busman's holiday, go over a convention over in Scandinavia lined up. So because of that, I only came back for a bit and then vanished again to go off to Scandinavia. I am, however, now back, so there should no longer be any major issues. Moving down, was Ulric in writing influenced by Space Wolves at all, or vice versa? So, Brock, that's a really interesting question. Really interesting, because for me, no, but I loved the Space Wolves at the time when I was doing the writing for the Cult of Ulric. And if you take a look at the Cult of Ulric and how it's presented, it does have some similar aspects, particularly because we're dealing with sort of Viking-y looking guys with big beards who carry big weapons and are very angry. There's some crossover there. But broadly speaking, the answer is no. Just not. The White Wolves, Lupus Vice, if you take a look at the old banners that used to run alongside them with, say, Warhammer 4th edition, when the White Wolves got their first official miniatures, have very much been their own thing, always, and don't really draw upon the Space Wolves at all. Equally, the Space Wolves, when you go over, are much more Viking-based. They are going a Viking across the galaxy, and they're not particularly original as an idea. They're a bit silly as an idea, but they're still super cool in their own way. But for me, the answer for this is it's never been a direct influence, but you can't help but be influenced by the things you think are cool. I would say that in Ulric writing, for me at least, I was much, much more inspired by all of the northern gods inside real world mythologies. As part of my preparation for writing the Tome of Salvation, I did a lot of reading about the gods and the goddesses of Northern Europe, how they presented. I also did a good bit of writing about the gods and goddesses of places like, say, Greece, Rome, the classical gods and goddesses of Europe, because the root of the pantheon that Warhammer has sort of reflects that. We all know that Myrmidia is sort of just Athena. Myrmidia takes a lot of beats from Athena. And one of my jobs as a writer when I was writing about the gods was to try and break this up and make it a more Warhammer version. So the Myrmidia that I created for Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay 2nd edition was not Athena specifically, but she still was influenced by and drew a lot of influence from Athena in the real world version. But she wasn't just a cut and paste, she was her own entity. She had literally been born into the mortal realms, purposely chose to do so herself, had gone through hell, bound together Estalia and Tilia underneath one leadership, got assassinated by the Skaven, at least that's what the story was for it back then, and then returned as a goddess, and was always somewhat of a martyr figure because of that, because she got killed after she had successfully bound everything together. And after her death, the whole thing she had built begun to fall apart. Super fun. Anyway, loosely, the answer to this is no, but you can't help but be influenced by the stuff that you like. Hey, Stephen Lucas, hard to put it in words, but Teddy likes putting TF2 Australian as one of the best US presidents. Chad, despite wearing British spectacles. Okay, Stephen, I'll accept all of that. I would be looking, if I were trying to show strong ties and influences, I would be looking to discuss the things that Teddy Roosevelt did and then compare, contrast, and potentially discuss how they compare with the things that Magnus did. But yeah, okay, sure. I'm cool with that. Let's just drop this one in here. Did Fishman kidnap Ryan again? Sadly, Ryan has come up with an issue. He's now confirmed it, so he won't be turning up. I will be continuing on with a slightly different take on the Cult of Ulric. If you are just turning up now, I've already done a good chat about it so far. Just scrub back around about 10 minutes and you'll hear me discussing it. Moving on to Sean Schultz. Do we need to worship the fishmen to get both Andy and Sotek? What was your favorite part of the trip? So the first part of that is no, you don't need to, but it might be beneficial. The second part was my favorite part of the trip. This is tough. I enjoyed a lot of my trip over to Scandinavia. If you've never been up there, it is beautiful, but it's also really like home for me. So I come from Scotland. I grew up in the north of Scotland, and I lived in different parts of Scotland throughout my life, including the Highlands, right down to the coastlines. I lived in lighthouses for a good chunk of my life as well, along the coasts of Scotland. Now, Scandinavia, if we go over there, and if we take it as a whole, Denmark isn't like where I was, but I was only into Copenhagen and then pretty much out as I moved over to Sweden and then up through Norway. But Norway in particular is really like Scotland, but stretched upwards. All of the fjords of Norway are just like Scottish coastline, but it's made much steeper on either sides. And the mountains are just that bit higher as well. So they're all covered in snow at the top, where our ones tend to be somewhat tepid, a few mountains with snow here or there. But it felt really like being home, but a bit different. And the fjords were beautiful. Now, you might not know, but Scotland has fjords. We don't call them fjords in Scotland. We've got two names for them because we're a pain in the ass. On one side of the coast, so down the east side of the coast, the fjords are called firths. And if you take a look at Scotland, you'll see there's a whole bunch of firths. The Moray Firth, the Firth of Forth, they're everywhere. Firths all down the side. Firths tend to be wider than fjords and far open bays, but they do move into great big salt water fjords. They're called fjords. They're the same word. They've got the same root. Fjord and firth are basically the same thing. But if we go over to the west coast of Scotland, they have a completely different name. They're called sea lochs because Scotland's contrarily like that. So these are pretty much proper firths, and proper fjords, and they're very much like the ones over in Norway, just a lot shorter. Some of the ones in Norway are like hundreds of kilometers long. They're proper, stupid, super awesome to go through. But yeah, we have sea lochs, and they've got loch names like Loch this, Loch that, and so on. And these sea lochs are basically just fjords. So the scenery wasn't new, but it had a different scale and a different shape. And most importantly, let me bring up a small comment as I just quickly pop in there. So, yeah, my camera's gone weird today. I'm going to fix it after the stream. I know. I'm far more cragged and weird looking than this. My beard looks weird too. But hey, I'm all sort of pixelated at the edges as well. It's gone a bit weird, but let's just pretend that never happened. This is the slightly more youthful version. I've just had, I don't know, Botox or something. Let's go with that. I'm a much more craggy individual than this camera is trying to pretend. Anyway, where was I? Fjord, sea lochs. Because I had to mention that before I passed by because it was really funny. The sea lochs were great. So the fjords were gorgeous. I went down I forget the longest fjord. I'm going to get the name wrong. So I'm not even going to try and pronounce it. I took a trip down the length of that entire fjord by boat, and it was freaking amazing from Flum all the way down to Bergen. And it was amazing. We took the fast ferry, which only took like 6 hours. Only 6 hours. And that zipped through at some speed with some of the best scenery I've seen in my life. If you want to see my version of how I enjoyed that, head over to Facebook, find me, Andy Law. I'm up there. I posted over there about my trip largely because that's where most of my family still communicate. I don't use Facebook much because Facebook, but I posted loads over there. So if you want to go and follow me over there or go friend me or whatever, you can find me over on Facebook, and I posted a ton of images over there. So yeah, the fjords were freaking amazing. But if I had to pull out one, I'm going to pull out one of the quieter moments, a word that I feel like I can't use anymore whenever I'm doing writing because ChatGPT et al. Love saying "and a quiet moment" or "and quietly they did this." So it sounds like you've written AI text, and I hate it. But one of the quieter moments was heading over to Gudvangen, where we went to the Viking village. And it turns out the chap who's behind the Viking village, or one of the chaps there, I knew loads of people he knew, and Lindsay and I ended up talking to him and his wife for an absolute age. So we know some of the people that deal with the Scottish version of that, the Clanranald Trust that run a big fort over in the west side of Scotland. And it was just odd. Lots of shared people. We talked to them. We swapped Facebook connections because apparently Facebook is the only place I can go nowadays. And it was just great. So going over to the Viking village, having a wander around there, there's more photographs of that up on Facebook if you want to see it. I might write a post over on the Lawhammer blog about it, just to post a bunch of the photographs that we took. So if you're following us over on the Lawhammer blog, you'll probably see a post about that coming up in the next few days. If you don't, go check us over to the Lawhammer blog on Patreon. It's all free. You don't need to give us money or anything. Of course, if you want to give us money, I'll never say no. But check over there and I'll do a big post and you can all have a look. Right, so where was I? I was talking about what my favorite part of the trip was, which means I go down to Joe Numbers. Hello, from work. Hi, Joe. I'll be quiet, Joe, so that no one realizes I'm bellowing in your ear. And welcome back, Andy. Thank you. We've seen chances to come back from chaos in Age of Sigmar, but is it possible in fantasy? Could a god help force it? The answer is yes. And this has been something that has happened in Warhammer Fantasy multiple times. This isn't an Age of Sigmar thing. This is something that Warhammer has always had. We go back to the very earliest iterations of it. There's a demon that's presented inside the Conrad series of books, a set of books that is vilified by many, loved by others. But in there is a literal demon who has been brought back from chaos and no longer is a chaos demon, has become something new. And this is something that pops up in multiple places throughout different books where chaos is impossible to come back from except when it isn't. And this is an undercurrent thread that pops up all over the place. The general rule of thumb is, no, you can't. Once your soul is damned, you're screwed. But there are countless examples where free will has overridden this to a degree. So Warhammer is not a world where it is set in stone, but it is a world where things like mutation make it effectively set in stone. If you become a mutant, the vast majority of the world is going to ostracize you. You are done. And the only place where you'll be safe is in the arms of the various forces and factions of chaos. There are entire groups within the Warhammer world, though, that very much fight against and deny this. For example, take a look at the ogres. The ogres, who are generally speaking resistant to chaos, can still mutate. And when they do mutate, other ogres kind of don't care. It isn't a part of their culture to ostracize mutation. That's just more. And ogres are all for more. Their god is not anti-chaos per se. Their god, the Maw, the great god of hunger that sits at the bottom of the giant pit that was created by a warpstone meteorite pulled down from the sky by the Cathayans, big long story there, go check our streams about it. Their god couldn't give a fig whether an ogre has got 3 arms or 2, whether he's got 3 eyes or 2, or whether he's just got 1 eye because 1 eye has been pulled out. Ogres don't care. Thus meaning the whole concept of Chaos Ogre is really fluid. Are they worshipping ruinous powers? Probably not. Even if they're mutants, they're probably still much more focused on the Maw. But when they go north and they find these weird gods, some of whom bring benefits, yeah, they'll give lip service to them, and then they'll leave and give lip service to others. Some will become convertees. Others will just fade in and out. Chaos is a lot more complicated than Sigmar and his cult likes to pretend, where they tend to just say, you're doomed, it's time to stave your skull in with a big hammer. You're fucked. There are ways back. Take a look at, for example, the Dragon Emperor, who after the Cataclysm, when the world was flooded with magic and created multiple different chaos species, had took some of those mutated species and cleansed them, making them no longer in any way corrupted. Now, to loosely explain what corruption means that they are directly influenced by chaos to some degree, and possibly they're even leaking a bit of that. So if you stay too close to these entities, you yourself in turn may corrupt. That's something that's been a core of Warhammer for a long time. It was sort of hinted at in Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay 4th edition. The mechanic was a bit heavy-handed, where most mutants would give off a small amount of mutation, effectively turning mutation into a disease in some respects. You got mutation, and that corruption seeped out of you. But that was something that Games Workshop requested, because that's very much how they saw the corruption slowly spreading across the Warhammer world. It's one of the reasons why the Cult of Sigmar says, stave their head-ins with hammers. But that doesn't mean that they'll worship chaos. There's multiple examples of corrupted entities, i.e. those who have got, if you want to use it in a magical term, the black wind of magic, Dar, sort of within them and causing these mutations like cancers to grow out of them. This Dar that is inherently within them can influence and affect others and make them mutants and corrupted as well. Doesn't mean they necessarily worship the dark gods. There's lots of examples of corrupted individuals, particularly things like necromancers and demonologists, who are corrupted and their bodies are becoming something different, perhaps emaciated and very weird, but they're not necessarily falling to chaos. They're just, their bodies are changing. Things, magic is shifting within them. The chaos corrupted creatures as well could very easily also be described as warpstone corrupted, or alternatively just magic corrupted. That, and whilst yes, chaos pushes that into the world because it causes change and makes the world sort of collapse in on itself, basically makes the world a big giant cancerous mess. It's not actually pure chaos. All of the gods in Warhammer come from the same realm. The realm of the gods. The realm of chaos is just where all the chaos gods are. The other gods have got their own etheric reflections over on that side. And they're all magical entities. All the spirits in the Warhammer world are magical entities. Magic and the physical world don't work together very well. So long story short, yes. Which is a pretty long way of doing it. Maybe no, wait a minute. Let me just see what Lindsay's saying. His wife was from the same place in England as my dad too. I have no idea what yet. It's an ongoing conversation. I shall just miss past this. Hey, Nils Andre, what are you saying today? Hey, Nils. Idea and support. Thank you very much. Solar wind from Sol Sun strips the world from its natural magic. Fun. The old ones pulled the world closer to the sun to replace it with new magic from their portals to set a trap for chaos. Age of Sigmar. Thoughts? As good a reason as any for having this occur. For those of you that don't know, the Warhammer world used to be far away from their sun, from their star, which is often referred to as Sul. And they were about as far away as, say, I don't know, Mars, something like that. And the whole planet got pulled by the old ones into a position that's very close and very similar to where Earth is. That process heated the entire world and made it much more habitable and much more able to support the species that they then seeded inside the world, which were, to cut a very long story short, the lizard men, who were cold-blooded and needed the heat. It also completely changed the world, which was a gigantic ice-covered world with just a band of melted area near the equator, where there was what we'd almost call, not quite a tropical, but it certainly wasn't hot. It wasn't the desert landscapes that we'll get later. And this band is where many of the creatures of the old version of the Warhammer world lived, but many of them lived up in the frozen ices, including the dragons. The dragons preferred the cold, much preferred the cold. And as the planet was pulled into the sun, a lot of the dragons fell into slumber because it was uncomfortable for them. They moved into the depths of the mountains where they could keep cold, and the natural magics of the world sustained them. Dragons don't need to eat in the same way that elves sometimes don't need to eat, because they can just subsist off of, while they're in hibernation, the magic that permeates the world. Now, running on this, solar wind stripping the world from its natural magic. First, why? What happened? Is it just a random occurrence that this occurred and the magic is gone? If that's the case, we can objectively say that probably didn't happen, because we have versions of all the winds of magic happening before the cataclysm. They are all there. So the replacing it with a new magic isn't what occurred if we run with the official story. But could you do this? Yes, because the magic that we got before the cataclysm was, let's be blunt, a bit weird. There's lots of strange stories tied to it. And when the sun is pulled in, we can then easily say that's when the winds of magic first manifested, which is long before the cataclysm anyway. We have a good, 5, 6, 7,000 years worth of time when the old ones arrived, pulled the planet in, and stuff happened. So there's lots of time for change and for the winds of magic and magic as we understand it in Warhammer to be established. So could you do this? Yes. Could it work as a story? Yes. You want to make this for a cool one? Go for it. I think it'd be super fun. We're being here with the Ar-Ulric being head of the Ar-Ulric religion. Grand Theologians for Sigma are the heads of for Tau. Yes, Hierophant. More. Yes. Also, welcome back. Do I have my Tome of Salvation here? Because I was looking at it the other day. Let me see if I've got, because I wrote, obviously, Tome of Salvation back in the day. In fact, no, Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay 4th edition. I wrote it into there. Give me a second. I'm just going to read it out to you, Liker Gaming. So each of the cults have got their own heads, except for the cult of Rena. The cult of Rena is, each temple is its own cult. And when I was writing the core book for Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay 4th edition, I thought it was essential to make sure we marked in who these heads of the cults were. The original treatment for the writing for the religious section was done by Graham Davis, who many of you may know from Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay 1 era through to 4, and the creator of much of what we understand of Warhammer. And he did the original treatment for each of the cults, but he did it from a Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay 1st edition perspective. And I gave him a quick ping, and I said, hey, this is Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay 1. Do you mind if I update it to everything else? He said, sure. And I just basically rewrote it. So I rewrote it, pinged it back to him. We ended up with a completely different version. So the cult of Manan, if you do get that, the head of that cult's called the Matriarch of the Sea, and she's down in Marienburg. The cult of Mor is the Custodi del Portale. I don't know Italian, so I pronounced that badly. And he's down in Lucini in Tilia. For the cult of Myrmidia, it's La Aguila Ultima down in Estalia in Magrita. If we go to the cult of Ronald, they have no official head of the cult, but rumors persist of leaders of the cult which have got crosses tattooed onto their hands. And there is one who has 10 crosses, who is ostensibly the highest regarded Ranaldin in the old world. So the answer to it is no, there's no official head. They all run as individual cells. If you want an official head, it's probably the god itself. Cult of Raya does not have an official head. The entire cult in some respects was subsumed and to a degree wiped out by the cult of Tal, but Ryan worship never stopped. So for all the cult of Tal sort of wiped over it and went, we now rule all of this, worship to Raya continued unabated, with lots of midwives, groups of women, fertility cults, et al. Working in the towns and villages of the empire, and there is no head of the cult. The cult is as strong as it ever was, but the cult of Tal officially claims it's sort of over. Cult of Shalia is, believe it or not, head of the cult is in Britonia, over in Corone, and that's the Grand Matriarch. You'll find her over there. Cult of Sigmar is obviously the Grand Theogenist, who is in Altdorf and Reichland. Cult of Tal is the Hierarch, who is the top of the cult of Tal and Drya, if you go with some, or just the cult of Tal, and that's in Talapine. God of Ulric, God of War, pardon me. He's obviously Ar-Ulric, which I will be discussing a little bit more in just a moment, because there's some things I'd like to say before I hang off from this stream. And that's, I think, all of them bar Verena, who doesn't have a head of the cult, because Verena is much more of a, how we best describe this swiftly. It's a group of high priests from the most important temples, all of whom come to consensus rather than having any but one individual lead them, because they believe that power ultimately can corrupt and no one voice should rule over all the others. So they effectively have a conclave of individual high priests and priestesses, the most important clerics in the old world, who all have a voice when it comes to the direction of the cult of Verena as a whole. Okay, hopefully that helps you out understand those ones. Let's pop up to another couple, and then we're going to go back to Ulric, because I've got a bunch of things I want to say. Oh, it's a draw. Thank you so much. Dude, supporting the channel like that. You are the best. Oh, okay. Maybe not the best. He's coming for a full-on bribe. Let's find out what we're getting. I'd like to come to bribe an episode. Setting of Age of Sigmar. Subject the dwarfs. Yes, all three, and their story as a people, especially how Grombrindal and Gotrek seems to be steering, affecting them, and what seems to be coming from them, assuming second lives. You know what? Let me just take that Zidron, or Zedron, or Zidron, number 7. Let me just pop that in as, because we haven't yet pinned down what we'd like to do for our first non-Marathi Age of Sigmar. And doing the dwarfs would be a good idea, because who doesn't want to see some Caradron overlords after all, or some fire slayers, and discussing them and how they came about. I think that's a good one, because dwarves are very popular and there's a lot that we discuss. So consider that bribe well accepted, and it will almost certainly be the next one or the one after that. Ryan and I have to discuss together, so until I've spoken to Ryan, I won't confirm, but I love the topic. This is happening. Thank you very much for the bribe and the support of the channel. It's greatly appreciated. Stephen Lucas, both rises up during a period of national crisis, correct, followed by confronting a great evil. Love it. Now convinced Magnus art based on Teddy despite lack of hair. I don't know if that's true or not. I do know when I first saw the art for Magnus, I was working on a book with Black Library called Empire at War. And Empire at War had just received its art, and from that was included art of Magnus. And Magnus the Pious was depicted as, we know, basically he's got a top knot, and he was relatively old, which made zero sense at all, because Magnus was a young man during the Great War against Chaos. And I sent a quick message over saying, you do realize that Magnus was almost a kid when he did this. He was a man, probably in his 20s at the oldest, because he's going to rule for over 60 years. And it's marked in several places that he dies in his late 80s, probably, which means we're talking 25, 6 at most. And I got a message back going, right, because he looked about 50. And they went, well, we'll just assume that the art was created after, and images from him at that time were just backported. And that'll do. People mess things up all the time. And I was like, yeah, fair enough. The art was also used over in the card game. Well, I can't remember what the card game was called. The Warhammer card game, the one that used it, was it Warcry? Can't remember. So it was parted over to one of the card games as well, where Magnus the Pious was a card in that. And they used the same art. And as Magnus has been updated, with the few images that we've had, they've used the original art from the Empire at War and that era each time. And it's wrong. It's wrong for Magnus during the Great War. It's really objectively just wrong. So when I was doing the art for Lawhammer, We did 2 pieces for Magnus, both him as a young man and him as an old man, but not him as a man in between, because we already had art for that. So we did the young man version from the Great War Against Chaos, so when that was about to fall out, and then we did an old man version from when he's in his 80s and he's about to die. So if you check through the cards for Lawhammer, you'll find 2 other pieces of art for Magnus that we did to show him in his different eras. But yeah, good stuff. Running down, there's a couple of more. How many more? There's only one more super chat, so I'll just grab that and see if there's any other comments. Although there's not. Here we go. There's also a Twitchy one. Let's get to that first, because Twitch is sneaky and often is not caught by stinky software here. Unrelated comment. I told a friend that I bought a gun due to my fear of being attacked by birds. Okay. He said that I might be getting carried away. I shot into the air and said, "Not without a fight, I'm not." Okay, you made me laugh. Nice one, Dynaman. Joe Numbers. Why the Talraya animosity? Sexism, land grab, both. Cult of Tal is a particularly warlike cult, and it's a very male-dominated horn cult. The cult of Raya is a very fertile, accepting the horn type cult. And they weren't so much, it's not so much animosity, it's just male dominance claiming that this should all be one thing. And the male dominance largely failed, where the men sort of claim it's failed. The cult of Tal and Raya is a common form in multiple parts of the Empire, because the cult of Tal effectively says they're one thing. The hierarchs, they have 2 of them, in truth. One's male, one's female, hierarch of Raya and the hierarch of Tal. But the true cult of Raya has nothing to do with the cult of Tal and Raya, or just the cult of Tal. The true cult of Raya is just the day-to-day worship of fertility amongst the common folk of the Empire. And it has pretty much nothing to do at all with the cult of Tal. So Tal and Raya are sort of a thing. Tal is a unique cult, is sort of a thing, but the cult of Tal by itself, Raya, by itself is also a thing. Now, land grab is an important part, right from the very beginning. So we're talking all the way back to the time of Sigmar. The Telutan people were warlike people, arguably more aggressive than even the Teutogans in the north, who were the Ulricans. Now, the Ulricans are gods of war, and you think surely they're the most aggressive. Yeah, no. You find Tal invades and conquers Hochland, invades and conquers Ostland, invades and conquers Ostermark, invades and conquers Stirland, all the way down into Averland, all the way down into Visenland. In fact, down in Visenland, there's ancient tales of entire gods being wiped out by the arrival of the Telutans, who slew all of their local priests and priestesses. And some of them are still bitter to this day, because the gods of Warhammer do not rely upon worshippers. They're not small gods like Neil Gaiman might have pronounced for small gods or something similar. Neil Gaiman and Terry Pratchett did that. They're not small gods in that fashion, although they can be. In that they can be influenced by mortal worship, but they're not defined by mortal worship. Many of them are etheric entities in their own sole right. One of them, rather famously, Ahalt, who became Ahalt the Drinker, another fertility goddess, got super pissed and now basically hunts down Talites to this day, a god of Visenland down in the south. And that's super fun. It's horrible. This is also expressed in the politics of the Empire, where the first to declare themselves entirely separate from Sigmar's heirs and creating a new emperor was the Ottilians. Now, the Ottilians from Empress Attilia I ruled from Talapine, and it was the Talapine group that led the formation of an entirely new empire in the east of the empire. And it ruled from about almost Altdorf all the way over to the World's Edge Mountains and up into modern day Kislev, because it was founded before Kislev even existed. And it was an empire that was as large as the empire on the other side, with Reichland and with Middenland and with Visenland, and it was at war with them at various points over the course of several centuries before another emperor gets pulled out, called the Wolf Emperor most commonly, up in Middenheim, and they ate into territory on the other side. They conquered Hochland, which in turn was conquered again by Talabecland, and there's this constant civil war in the empire during the Age of Three Emperors. But loosely speaking, the Telutans, one of the most warlike of peoples, and their god is not against that. And indeed, basically is one giant penetrator of all the other gods and cults out there. He is a very male fertility god in some respects too. He is the great penetrator, which is a fun way to describe it, eh? Moving down, Stephen Lucas. Scares and sun, tan do make you look older. Yeah, well, you know, I don't get much sun. I come from Scotland, so I don't really have much of a problem there. There is also one from Twitch. Hello, Twitch folks. Chaos being chaos, a Warhammer army has been sent to our world during the Second World War, somewhere on the Western Front. If we assume a 3,000-point army built to be lore accurate, so no all-metal wizards, for instance, what faction would do best? No necessary wins, but we would be able to carve out a niche or maybe even integrate with society. Let me just check that I understand the question before I answer it. So, chaos. Warhammer army is sent to our world, so it's the real world, during the Second World War. So we're talking the 1940s early, and we've got ourselves a Chaos army arriving. Somewhere in the Western Front, sure. Okay, we're getting to move relatively close to a completely different game here when I think of Trench Crusade. We're sort of similar to that, but Trench Crusade's got a longer history. If we assume 3,000 points, okay? So this is a relatively large Warhammer army. No, so no metal wizards, for instance. What faction would do best? It's going to be lore accurate. So if it's chaos, it's just any Warhammer army. It's not just chaos. So what faction would do best? I mean, ultimately, Lisman, no. They rely upon the magic of the world. Elves would do very well, but they're easy to gun down. Dwarves would do pretty well, harder to gun down. They'd embed and drop down. Where are we going? On to the Western Front. See, 3,000 points isn't that big, which means that they're all going to get annihilated if they're just going to war. If I was to pull one out, though, as to doing particularly well, ogres would be massacred because they're so different to what's out there already. You're looking for someone who's charismatic, can work, accept the world, adapt and develop. Probably dark elves would be the most successful. They are the most charismatic of all the elves, the most capable of working with diplomacy. They're also used to ruling with a very small faction leading a greater whole, so they could very easily lead the local humans in a way that probably would not be very well accepted. Plus, as a species, they're far more aware of the idea of different worlds, of realms that came before, the fact that they came from the old ones, high technology. They'd be much more adaptable, and they are dynamic as a species, unlike the high elves, who are not dynamic. They are proud, separate, and aloof. Most others I don't think would do frightfully well. That's super fun. Hopefully that gives you an answer. I could probably make a good argument for all of them, though. Would Sean make a good elf? Attitude. DX. Shawn Michaels as a good elf. As he is, no, he's far too short. He's not the tallest guy in the world. His character as portrayed inside WWE, though, could certainly be elven in character. Right, moving down to Darius. When it comes to ogres, do most who get into fights in a tribe survive due to being so tough like orcs, as long as they don't go against the tyrant? Broadly, yes. And I think broadly, this is a good place to consider it. They are pretty warlike, and they're pretty belligerent, and they're pretty prone to beating each other up and establishing dominance. But unless you are going down into the pit to a guts out fight to the death, most times death does not occur, particularly when it's those who are above you fighting those who are underneath, because they want to have the broader power that comes from more people. But if you're challenging, you're in trouble. Broadly, though, ogres are tough. It takes a lot to kill one. One thing that you don't often get amongst ogres in the miniature side is the fact that many of them, if not most, are missing body parts because they have lost fights in pits. And often the eating of the person, the ogre, I suppose, that loses is a common outcome. And that's not necessarily I eat the whole ogre. That's actually, for most ogres, exceedingly difficult to do in any short period of time because ogres are fucking huge. But feasting it out a loser amongst your mates, that's certainly something you could do as a whole. Normally, it's like bits of an arm, cut it off there. You lost your hand because you lost. They have real consequences, their fights. There's lots who've got blades and hooks instead of their limbs, who've lost parts of their feet, bits of their face. Ogres are a bit of a mess. And the most successful ogres are not necessarily going to be ones who have always won all their previous fights, because every ogre is going to have a story, some of which will include losses and successes. So all of them are carrying some sort of scar of loss at some point. But yeah, I think that's a good way of putting it. Moving down as well, when it comes to ogres, apparently we got this one twice, according to my chat. Apologies if you popped that one in twice. Moving down, hey, we've caught up. Right, so I do want to discuss a couple of points that I was referencing almost, must be about half an hour ago now, because I just kept on going with the comments so we could get rid of them and have a little chat. If any more super chats come in, I will take them once I finish this section. When it comes to characters like Ar-Ulric and their write-ups that you get inside roleplay games, you tend to find that you get yourself a couple of different types, maybe 2 or 3 different types of writer in Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay. And I think it's worth just quickly discussing this, because it's not something we've really discussed before. When I was running the game, I got pretty much all the writers who were potentially going to be working on the setting, coming to me with their ideas. And it was fascinating to see the different sorts of ideas that they brought. Those who were playing the game tended to bring in such complicated, fascinating, ground-based ideas. Those who weren't playing the game and were instead just writing for it tended to bring top-tier, event-based or idea-based ideas. And by that I mean, for those who are playing the game, they'd often work their way through the game, seen a bunch of things happen at their table and gone, I want to recreate that and make it better. So they sat down and they spin up an idea around it. And often the details that bled through from having played through it were far deeper than those who were just taking high concepts and trying to figure them out. Where when we got other writers who weren't playing the game and it was all about, well, this faction's this and this faction's that. What happens when they meet? Here's a core conflict. This is the story I'm going to tell. Tended to be just, I'll figure it out as I write. And they have a completely different setup, where often the ones who are playing the game a lot already knew what they wanted to write about, because they were all too often discussing the world that they already had lived in. And for the writers of Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay, in the first spate of books, Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay 4, almost all of them were gamers. Almost all of them, not quite all, but almost all of them were ones who were playing Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay all the time. And it bled into the detail. There was just lots of fun, cool, niggly little details that they almost felt compelled that they had to ensure were inside the game, because it made it all make sense as a real world. Where those who weren't playing the game, they were just dealing with, I think this part that should be written this way today, because I think that works and is cool. And this thing should be there, thematically this fits, and they add it. Neither way is better. And you might go, well, surely those who are playing the game, adding all this cool detail, they're essential. No. They're just providing a different route into writing about Warhammer. Those who are coming in with high concepts and high ideas are as important. They often have a far more broader blue sky thinking, where they don't feel completely tied down by everything that's come before or the world they've played in. They're coming up with cool new ideas for what the setting could be, and they pitch those in. And some of those ideas, you're like, holy shit, that's so amazing. And that would never come from someone that was embedded in the world, because they'd say, well, that doesn't exist in the world. How could you even add that? That makes no sense at all. So having a mixture of those, and there's far more different types of writers than those two alone, but that's just a quick way of putting it. I mean, there's games designers, there's others who are very much interested in ensuring that core themes are reflected in the characters they're making, and they have no care at all about what the setting may or may not have said in the past. It's all down to the producer, the developer, or indeed Games Workshop, depending on which one acts as the primary barrier, to ensure that all of it matches previous lore that had been written. And these different writers pool in to create what will hopefully be super cool books for Warhammer. And Emil Valgeir, to go back to the loose topic of the day, we are going to be covering this one later properly. Ar-Ulric is a character that took from both sides of this, because we have ourselves writers like, say, for example, Graham Davis. Graham Davis has been writing for Warhammer since Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay was first created. He's a writer on the very first book of it, and right up to some of the most latest books. And he doesn't play the game. He just knows the Warhammer world that he loves, and he's a brilliant writer, and he comes with great ideas. So he misses a lot of the nitty-gritty of living in the world or what other writers have written, because he doesn't go and read every single book that's out there, because he knows it all, because he created it. And he comes in with new ideas and new cool stuff, and he presents it all and drops it down. And he was pretty much involved with much of the creation of Ar-Ulric. He was running with Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay when that character was very first created, through the process of showing how the Sigmarites and the Ulricans were at war with each other in the Empire in circa the year 2512 in the Imperial calendar. And this was all set up during his era, and what the character needed for the story was added then, and it was a very different style of Warhammer to the one that we'd get later. Ar-Ulric as a character was much more like a pope-like figure, but covered in wolf furs. This adapts over the course of multiple generations. Different writers come in, the Cult of Ulric's expanded, the Storm of Chaos happens, the Cult of Ulric is updated by Gav Thorpe, Tome of Salvation comes along, the Cult of Ulric's updated by me, the Cult of Ulric's then updated again or reiterated. We take a look at how it's presented in 3rd edition Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay. The Cult of Ulric is basically just copy-pasted from previous editions with a few extra details added, but most of those details were individual locations rather than details about the cult as a whole. Then we hit 4th edition, which drew heavily upon what came before and didn't do a great deal of new edition. But when Graham was adding his bits, he said it could be this and it could be that, because he's a blue sky thinker. But most of the writers for the original spate of Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay 4 books were people who were deep in the setting, which is what was needed to ensure that the core books that were being released at the beginning all matched what was out there already. We didn't need blue sky thinking. We had to basically build the foundation so that other people could then build up from there. And Ar-Ulric was included in that. He was mentioned right inside Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay 4's core book. That's the book that I pulled up earlier. That one. And when the very first books were getting written for Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay, in particular the Enemy Within campaign, I had long discussions with Graham about who Ar-Ulric used to be and who Ar-Ulric is now. And I also had discussions to justify how both of those could be true, because the original character is very different to how Ar-Ulric was presented inside Storm of Chaos. The Emil Valgir character from the Storm of Chaos was quite different to the Enemy Within's Ar-Ulric character from the 1st edition of the game. And a lot of our discussions were how both of those characters could exist, how we could transition from one into the other and still make it absolutely feel like it was Ulric, and that both characters were clean representations of that. Then we went to work writing it. Graham, as we were discussing it back then, was to write the first treatment. I was then to come in and make sure that everything he had written matched all of the lore, because I knew so much more about the lore as a whole. But at the same point, we had other people working on other books. I had Dave Allen, for example, had been employed to write the Middenheim book. And the Middenheim book, Ar-Ulric and his entire family was going to be discussed. So I sent a ton of material over to Dave Allen, who I believe now might even be producing Warhammer. I'm not too sure. I've not been keeping up with it. And I said, hey, Dave, this is where we probably see Valgir. It took everything that we had discussed with Graham. It took everything that we were intending to use inside the Enemy Within campaign at that point. And it also added a whole bunch of extra substantive details from the writers who had played through Warhammer and basically made sense of Ar-Ulric and made it all work. All of that was given over to Dave. Go synthesize through parts of this. I can't remember how much. I think most of it was given over in a phone call with him. A phone call. And we don't do phone calls these days like I was on the phone. It was, I don't know, probably in Discord or something. I can't remember what it was. Probably actually a Google room or something. And we talked it all out and I explained everything that was needed. He took notes. He pushed back on some things and said, can I do it this way instead? And I was like, yeah, of course. I was quite keen that he had his own angle because he was writing the book. But equally, I said, it's important that we include these parts. We had a discussion about Frey-Ulric rather than just Ar-Ulric. Frey-Ulric is a title that sits underneath Ar-Ulric. and speaks to a large area within the Empire that is a subsection of the Cult of Ulric and whether we're going to include it. We also discussed exactly how we'd use Den Fathers, for example. Den Fathers have been mentioned in several places, including the Tome of Salvation, which is a replacement term for what had been presented in a book called Ashes of Middenheim, written by Graham Davis again, where they used the term Deputy High Priest for the Cult of Ulric. And that was deemed to be, by Games Workshop, deeply un-Ulrican. It just didn't sound like something that an Ulric cult would use, but it would sound like one that the first edition of Ulric's cult, which was a far more formalized, less warlike, more like just almost a modern church, rather than a bunch of crazy lunatic Ulrican worshippers. And they requested a change when we were writing it for Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay 2nd edition. So the term Den Father was created, and we sent that over and said, this is what we think it should be and why. This is the history behind the term. Games Workshop were like, perfect! And if you go into the Tome of Salvation, you'll find in the Ulrican section that we use both terms. In fact, I think I've got the book here because I've got my original write-up notes for that. Let me just find it here. It's inside the structure of the Empire. Beneath Ar-Ulric, no, it's not. Yeah, here we go. Beneath Ar-Ulric is the Grand Master of the White Wolves and the High Priests. Each major temple has one High Priest who has a single Deputy High Priest, sometimes called a Den Father. And it was important that we kept both terms because right at the beginning, I was super keen to ensure that we didn't effectively overwrite what Ashes of Middenheim had said. We wanted to keep it, but we also wanted to show that there was a new term that Games Workshop preferred, which was Den Father. So Den Father sitting underneath the High Priests, and then above all the High Priests is Ar-Ulric himself. And that is a long, roundabout way of saying we use different types of writers to pin down who Ar-Ulric was going to be. But this often leads on to a question that many people throw at us, which is, so when you're writing stuff, do you use things from your own games? Which I've already confirmed here, yes, we do. And do you ever put some of your characters in or stuff like that? And I'm like, yeah, sometimes, but it's not because we want to get them in and make them famous, for example, because they're now part of the canon. It's because they work for the core tone, theme, and story that you're trying to tell with the book. For example, the Cult of Ulric. One of the goals whenever you're writing about anything for a roleplay game is to explain what the core conflicts are. And conflicts are what drive stories, i.e., I want to do this, I want to do that. And the story is one side or the other winning. And most books and stories and novels and games that use plots will have a conflict at the core of it. As in, bad guy wants to do this, good guy doesn't want them to do that, let's have a scrap. Good guy wins, the end. It's the same formula again and again in 1,000 different ways. But when it comes to role-playing games, you've got to add conflicts within. And one of the conflicts of the Cult of Ulric, for example, is celibacy. So this is something I was speaking about, particularly for Ar-Ulric. And earlier on in the stream, I was mentioning how Ar-Ulric shouldn't have kids, but he does, even though he's celibate. How? And this is something that had been established in the Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay 1st edition version of Ar-Ulric, where it said that the entire cult of Ulric was celibate. And it wasn't celibate for religious reasons, because Ulric was a noted horn dog. He was out with everybody. He was out with goddesses, humans. There's supposedly mortal descendants of him all over the Empire, particularly up in Middenland. The entire concept of many werewolf types in Warhammer, and also the Children of Ulric, an actual faction, sometimes the Sons of Ulric, depending upon which name they go with, all come from Ulric and his, let's say, sexual shenanigans. So you'd think that the Ulricans, as their cult, would be out there shagging away like mad. And the answer to that is no. And it all harks back to something I was discussing earlier, the Age of 3 Emperors. And during that time, Ar-Ulric has a massive falling out with the Graf of Middenheim, which is where the Cult of Ulric is founded. And he hikes it out and goes down to Talabheim and joins Ottilia in her other empire and supports Ottilia and her claims to be empress, not Middenheim. Takes a whole bunch of White Wolves down with him and forms a new group of Teutigans down with the Talabiclanders and says, we're down here now. Screw that guy up there. He sucks. I hate him. And the Cult of Ulric is now centered in Talabheim. It was a thing. Eventually, they decided they want to go back. Long story short, the Graf, who as I recall was Heinrich at the time, he made a deal with the cult of Ulric. And there was a reason that they fell out. And that was the cult of Ulric was getting so powerful that the great families of Ulric were building dynasties that were rivaling the local elector counts. And they didn't like that. And they pretty much kicked the cult of Ulric out. Because they were going to probably take control and install a theocracy. And that is not at all what the elector counts wanted for obvious reasons. So to accept them back into Middenheim, which is their holy city where the great flame of Ulric burns, a deal was made. And it's long complicated, but at the heart, the important part here was that the cult of Ulric swore to celibacy forever. Meaning that no longer would there be an issue with children from the priests and rising a rival dynasty and attacking the elector counts in their home. And it sounds like a cool story, but large numbers of people who played the game went, well, wait a minute, this is bullshit. It makes no sense at all. And you might go, well, why is this bullshit? You know, you become a priest, you swear celibacy, you don't have any kids. But just think for a moment, just take a moment to take a beat and think about what that actually would do in practice. And the answer is, not everybody becomes a priest immediately. You can have kids and then become a priest. So it doesn't stop rival dynasties per se. It just provides a barrier. And the cult of Ulric is stymied by it. And one of the things that I'd run through in my own game was a pretty strong storyline about how the Valgirs, which were a core family within the cult of Ulric, how the Valgirs had built an entire dynasty that had now ruled the cult of Ulric for some time, and they were a primary rival to the Todbringers for power within the city. They both shared an electoral count vote, so they basically both had the same power for electing new emperors and all the rest. One had the entire cult of Ulric beneath them, which was spread across all the old world, but mostly in Middenland, and the other had Middenland. And they were vying for power. And that vying for power summarized in their vying over a relationship with a single woman, Emanuel Schlagen, who was in The Enemy Within. And they were both vying for her affections because it had become that petty. They were in love, they were not in love, who really cares? And that was going to be a core component of basically personalizing this entire framework of political problems between cult and secular power structures within Middenheim. That was sadly slightly lost in the version of The Power Behind the Throne that hit print, but it was definitely going to be a core component of it when we were first discussing out the Power Behind the Throne book. And Ar-Ulric was celibate, but he was ignoring the rules. Not that, his rules are what they are, because as far as he was concerned, screw those stupid rules, because they were not there for religious reasons. It was purely politics. And he was basically breaking his oath to be off with some women he probably shouldn't have been. And that was super fun. But that's a conflict for The Enemy Within. And when we were writing the Tome of Salvation, I figured it was fun to explain that conflict in a different way and how celibacy was causing problems. So I wrote this bit in. I'm just going to read it out because it's going to be far quicker than me summarizing it. So in 1547, and you're going to get some of the story about celibacy here, so we get the whole story that I wrote. Graf Heinrich of Middenheim, it was Graf Heinrich, there we go, forced the cult into vows of celibacy. Ar-Ulric agreed to this to gain access to Middenheim's High Temple after almost 200 years of exile in Talabheim. The Graf was afraid the cult would sire a rival dynasty in Middenheim and used the importance of the High Temple and the Eternal Flame to manipulate the cult back into accepting his demands. Now, almost 1,000 years later, the vows of celibacy are still sworn by new priests. The vows may be ancient, but the cult has a long memory and knows their origins, petty politics. Few Ulricans happily accept this. To make matters worse, they are passionate folk, and some find celibacy a hard promise to keep. Many priests, during drunken moments, are rumoured to slip. Frequently. Recently, there has been a furore in the Middenheim capital for Heinrich Todbringer. So we all know Boris Todbringer is the Elector Count. Heinrich Todbringer is his bastard son. The Graf's bastard son. Well, his bastard son. And is said to have got Sigrid Kuller, a young noblewoman from Nordland. If you go check out the Age of Sigmar, the Heirs of Sigmar book, you'll find the Kullers ruled Dietershaven up in the north in Nordland. With a child. Unfortunately, she is also a recently sworn priestess of Ulric. So what we have is the ruling Todbringers having a child with the cult of Ulric. This is a proper schism in the building. This is a conflict. And these pair are a core component of that conflict being personalized. And some of the best stories are looking at the bigger conflicts and saying, how can we make this about one or two characters so we can understand the bigger story with the metaphor being laid out within the individual characters. Some priests are using this as another excuse to bring the celibacy vows into the spotlight. For the creators of the vows, the nobles are willing to ignore them. Heinrich had a kid, is with the priestess of Sigmar. Ulric. Why should they exist at all if the nobles are ignoring it? The implications of the union are far-reaching, so it's no surprise that the priestess has vanished. Now, that's a pretty cool story, particularly because if he becomes heir and he has a kid with this priestess, they marry their kid, who very well could become the child of a priest and the child of the local nobles. We could be in the area of installing a theocracy. This is spicy shit. This is super cool. That character, Sigrid Kuller, was my wife's character in Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay, because we played through this, because I wanted to tell the story of what the vows of celibacy meant, and I did this. This character gets a picture later on the book. I drew a picture at the back of the Tome of Salvation of Sigrid Kuller. And I didn't add her because I wanted to go, hey, Sigrid, my wife's character, she's in the book. Woo! I couldn't care less about that. Maybe she does, but I couldn't care less about that. But it did give me a really cool way to present the conflict that the cult of Ulric has. So that is a very long way of saying, do we use the games that we've played as writers as an influence into the stuff that we create? Absolutely. And sometimes the stories that we create at home in our own games are so damn good. They resonate with the setting and its core conflict that it's much easier just taking the best bits of that and writing that out than it is trying to make up something entirely new that does exactly the same job. Because as far as everyone else is concerned, this is a cool new story that we can use. So that's an example of how that works. And Ar-Ulric and his relationship with Emmanuel Schlagen is a core component of reproducing that core conflict. Because instead of it being the nobles and the cult having a kid together, it's the nobles and the cult having basically a fight over a representation of all of their core struggles from the past. And that's super fun. Anyway, so all of that is an interesting thing to then move into some more comments. Hey, Jack Flanagan. Hi, Andy and Sotek. Sadly, it's only Andy because poor old Ryan couldn't make it today. It's my girlfriend's birthday today. Hi. Happy birthday to her. You have to catch this one later. Fully understand. I wish you both only the best. Sadly, it is just me, but I've had a good warble about stuff. Been quite enjoying this one. Sig River Guide asks, what would be the possible reason a noble lady of the Empire does not get referred to by her husband's house's name instead of her own? So there's lots of ways this could occur. Loosely, a noble lady of the Empire, when you marry into a house, generally takes the household name because she's now within that house. So for example, if you were Bertha of House Bert, and you married Siggy of House Sig. As a noble, you marry in, the two houses are joined, she brings her dowry or whatever other local customs there might be, the wedding is done, and she moves into House Sig. And she is from that point onwards referred to as coming from House Sig. Pardon me. For those of you who've watched, say, for example, Game of Thrones, you'll note that House Stark includes people that are not originally from House Stark. Because They're not. But that doesn't mean you forget your family you come from. Indeed, the house that you come from will often define you, and you'll never really feel like you are anything other than an outsider in the new house you move into. But to make this more complicated, many parts of the empire don't follow that template. For example, it's super common in parts of the empire for whoever has the title keeps the household name. So, for example, if you were to marry, let's say, Emmanuel, one of the most famous women in the empire, Emmanuel of House Leibowitz, who is the Elector Countess of Nuln and Visenland. You marry her, you're entering her house, because Visenland has got a long-established rule that women not only can inherit, will often inherit first, depending on the local custom, and they keep their name if they hold the title. If there is no title, it depends on the local customs. You might take the male or the female household name. And often bartering is involved, money being traded between sides to basically keep the family name held in place. And often, particularly if it's someone who's had nothing more than female children and wants their household name to survive, they'll often say, look, you can marry her, enormous dowry, but only if you take her name. That's the only way they'll do it. And the empire has more than enough accommodation for that. There is multiple reasons that women could hold on to their household names. And as I then get down into the weeds, I provided some examples, and we could just go into more. All of the empire has its own local customs. And because there are so many different ones, you can make them up. So the answer to this one is always yes, because you can make it up because the empire is so big. But if you want to be, but I want it to match the top rules we know, this answer is still yes, because it might be bought. It might be a custom for a particular grand province. It might be just that one family is much more influential than the other and refuse to give up their household name. We get lots of examples of this, where households have been forced into marriage and a double-barreled household name comes out because of it. Forced because they'd run out of money, invasion, conquest, politics. It doesn't really matter. So where beforehand you might have had a household of Adenauer, it then becomes something else, Adenauer, or Adenauer something else. Indeed, some of the more famous names in the empire, Holzwig Schliesten, definitely not Schliesten-Holzwig reversed from the real world, I almost certainly pronounced that wrong, is a double-barreled name because the Holzwigs had the titles, but the Schliestens had the money. And they bound together, and instead of the Holzwigs getting to keep their name, the Schliestens had theirs added on, and the Holzwigs accepted that because they wanted the money, and the Schliestens accepted that because they wanted the Holzwig name, so they bound their houses together. It's common, all sorts of double, and in some places, triple-barreled household names. And it's nothing to do with the man or the woman per se. It's to do with why these houses are bound together and what the result will be, which is often a new household, or one of the households just changing its names completely. So there's all sorts of stories across the empire where this absolutely works. Darius, same for gores in a fight. If we ever see a pack of lions try to kill a buffalo, they don't go down easy. True. They also survive crazy injuries in fights. Yeah, they really do. And gores, I think one of the mistakes of actually some of the writers is to view the more brutal societies as being deadly, pure deadly, because their writings, if they match the day-to-day life of doing that, would end up with no civilization left. The gores would be wiped out by themselves. So I agree with you completely. And Mike Hellforger, I just want to bring this one up because, yeah, fully aware something's gone weird with the filters on this, or my camera's just gone super low res. Look at my glasses. They're massively pixelated all over the place. It just looks weird. Oh, and I've just pulled off the holders for my glasses on the other side. That was weird. Let me just put those in back. No, these glasses are old. I think it's time to replace them. That should not have happened. There it is. I've dropped it on the ground. Let me just pick that up with... It's gone forever! No, I'll never wear my glasses again. Oh, there it is. Let me just fix my glasses while we're discussing that. Yeah, something's gone weird with the camera when I was away. My kids were using it, so I assume they did something, put on some filters, and I've yet to find out which bloody ones they used, but it's made my image look well weird. But I'm loving it. It's like, I don't know. Andy from the maybe more like the 2010s, actually, because hell, I'm old. Right, anyway, let's move down and just pretend that never happened as we go down to the Singemeister. If he moved to Sartosa, would he be Ar-Ulric? Yes, he would. I think that's definitely going to be the case. And let's bring up one there from Wesley's. Oh boy, big conflict there. That's a strong claim to be Graf. Yes, it is, which is why it made a really cool story. And that's harking back to the Sigrid and Heinrich and celibacy issue I was discussing. And it's why I decided I would replicate it, because the story was already so good, rather than just simply try to make a new one to describe why celibacy could bring conflict into your game. And it was super important. I did another little bit there about women in the Cult of Ulric and why there's a schism there as well. Go read the Tome of Salvation if you want to know more about that. Yeah, Andy without grass is not safe for Twitch, indeed. I don't know, maybe Andy Law OnlyFans version. Right, so, can't believe I said that. Given we don't have a Sotek, unless anybody has any pressing questions that you want to throw at me, I think I'm largely sort of done. We've discussed the bits about Ar-Ulric that will not come up in our Ar-Ulric stream, which is the version of Ar-Ulric I have is much deeper and broader than the one that we get from the official version of what the Cult of Ulric is. Because I've written, yes, a lot of it, but most of what I created for it, I've kept for my own games. Which is why the stream that we're going to have whenever I sit down with Ryan is going to be relatively tough for me, because I'm going to have to keep on going, no, that's not what the character is, because that didn't actually get written, or Dave wrote it slightly differently to how I expected it to be, or whatever else. So, yeah, that being the case, that was a long, convoluted way of saying Ar-Ulric, my version at least, is a bigger, deeper character, but some of it, much of it, has seeped into the official writing. And I gave some examples of how my writing that I've done for the official versions of the games have been deeply influenced by my own games as well. Skylar Martin says, something's wrong with the filter. Cat-faced Andy. I do love a cat-faced Andy. Cat-faced Andy is good. If you have checked out the slang dictionary that I put up on the Lawhammer channel. In fact, I'm just going to get a link for it now for those of you that don't have it. Lawhammer slang. It has cat-faced in there already, because cat-faced shit is basically a way of saying you're a fucking liar. Reason that cat-faced is said to be a liar in Warhammer is because cats are often associated with Renald, who is somewhat of a liar. And cat-faced is a core part of that. So this is a lexicon of swear words, slang, and other random shit that I'm just popping into the chat there that I did for Lawhammer some time ago. That must be about 3 years ago now we popped that up, because I did it for the players, because many of the players that we had in Lawhammer, so that's the actual play that I run, had never played Warhammer before, didn't really understand it. So I said, look, if you want to have a bunch of phrases that would suit Warhammer, here's a bunch. If you want to add them to the game, go for it. If you don't, that's okay too. I'll use some of them, not all of them, but do be aware there's an entire thieves' cant, as in a thieves' tongue, the way they speak, that is deeply colloquial and uses language in lots of ways. For example, they don't say thieves, they say pies, as in from a magpie, which is, again, another animal associated with Renald. So they say there's various pie types that will work with the thieves' cant. In fact, I'm going to open up the document here just because it's a super fun little aside. Let me just pull it out. In fact, it's going to make me download it, isn't it? Let me just open it straight in the page. So if I go to the thieves' cant section, the various types of pie include, and we go pie. You've got a pie is a thief, from their animal god of trickery, sacred animal. A pie eater is a watchman, so that's someone who chases down the pies. That's super fun. Can I see another one of the pies? Pie man, a master thief, a fence. I'm looking for types of pie. Magpie, someone's trying too hard to look like a rogue, often used to reference an outsider. So that's from Ronald's Sacred Animal, again, the pie. So, it's just a pair of magpies. So that's just two people who are pretending to be rogues on the street. And there's a whole bunch of them, but lattice pie, a burglar who pretends to be a lamplighter, going around lighting lamps, granting the right to carry a ladder in order to reach high windows. So he's a lattice pie. And you can see how that's like the ladders that go across the pies. So he's a different type of thief. A lamb pie, a thief who beats up weak targets to steal their goods. There's lots of different bits, and that's showing how different terms of words can be used in Thief's Cant, because Thief's Cant is just almost a dialect of Reichspiel. Let me move over to Hammond. Are we streaming the Professor Mick Xavier? So I'm a little bit like Xavier, Professor X, in that I am the slightly de-aged version just now because I've got a weird filter on my screen. Hammond also says, a new hand has touched the beacon. Yeah, quite. Ricky, Andy was seeing how we could make Warhammer's version of the Odyssey a follower of Myrmidia as the main character, of course. So I've done a version of the Odyssey in Warhammer because, much like you, I've given all different versions of the setting a good go. And our version was also, somewhat coincidentally, but it is the obvious choice, a Myrmidian. She was a character who hiked around, met Medusa as well, hiked around parts of Tilia, went over to the Dragon Isles, up through the Darklands, had a whole bunch of adventures there, and then went back all the way around the Southlands. It was a proper daft, massive journey, quite a bit longer than the equivalent through the various Aegean Islands and similar. And yeah, I think it's a great idea. Go for it. Run with that and see where it lands. And from Hammond, yeah, I agree. Mental Lie does make a lot more sense now. Well, you know, it's how it works. So, yeah. Unless we get another comment or two within the next couple of seconds, I'm probably going to call it. Just make sure I didn't miss any Lawhammer ones, just in case there was an Lawhammer one posted at the end there. There wasn't. Unless you've any one of the peeps out there right this very second posts up a comment, I will probably hold her off and say that we will be doing a stream concerning. Of course, someone comes in. We will be doing a stream. I'm cool. If you keep me here, so be it. The channel gets some support. We will be doing our full stream on the Cult of Ulric's leader, Ar-Ulric, with Ryan very soon. It's going to be a far more detailed version of who Ar-Ulric is, where he came from, and the current Ar-Ulric and the story of Valgir, which will also incorporate elements from the Storm of Chaos, because although the Storm of Chaos was hard written out, it's still in there. If cats call liars, it's because everyone is jealous of their majesty and perfection. Also, should Slanesh cultists have revere cats? Good luck with the Slanesh cultists getting away with that, because it would be proliferated by Ranaldans who use cats all over the place. So I think the answer to this, under most circumstances, would be no. But if you're in a place where Ranald doesn't exist and gods of cats don't really exist, no. But any Slanesh cultist a cult that was focused around cat worship, almost certainly, if it was in the Empire, would be infiltrated by the cult of Ranald to a degree. And that would make continuing on with what they do potentially very difficult. So, yeah. Frederico Velasquez says, what secrets might Ar-Ulric have? What knowledge, truth he is the guardian of? So, this is a fun one because it's not stuff that's really covered by the book. So I have no problems diving into this to a degree. This is more of a subjective one. So it's not stuff we're really going to be covering when Ryan and I dive into this. This is, this is a fun one. Ar-Ulric is the leader of one of the great cults of the Empire. The cult of Ulric has been in decline for centuries. It used to be the biggest. It got overtaken by both the cult of Tal and the cult of Sigmar. Right at the beginning, Sigmar was an Ulrican. And as time progressed, Sigmarism rose and came to replace Ulricanism as the core cult in many parts of the Empire. But in the north, Ulric still holds sway. In the modern Empire, most of the cult of Ulric is focused around Middenland and the neighboring provinces. parts of the cult of Ulric can be found across the rest of not just the Empire, but the Old World. The Old World doesn't really have much truck with Ulric down in the south, your Tilias and your Astalias, but he's still there. There's still shrines to Ulric in many of the various, barracks and places of war that you'll find down there. Myrmidia does not hold complete sway. And I say all of that to quickly introduce what the cult of Ulric offers in terms of how many are there. First things first, the Knights of the White Wolf. We often forget them as a force, but they are the largest order of knights in the Old World. Now, that's not strictly true. It's actually the Knights of the Righteous Spear, a Myrmidian order, but each individual temple raises its own Knights of the Righteous Spear, and they're not linked together properly. So and they often name them different things. So each temple might have their own name for these knights. So the Knights of the Righteous Spear are not really the biggest. The Knights of the White Wolf are. And unlike many orders, they are comprised of not just nobles, but commoners. In fact, the vast majority are commoners. And every single temple of Ulric raises Knights of the White Wolves. Sometimes a whole squad, sometimes more. Some temples have got entire regiments. And each of these regiments are gathered together in great companies, which are, broadly speaking, divided by province. So, for example, if we go for Black Company, that's Visenland's group. It's one of the smallest companies, but all of the temples in Visenland, all of their knights pull together in their Black Company, Red Company in Altdorf, Blue Company is up in Middenheim, Gold Company is also in Middenheim, Silver Company, or White Company, depending on which writer wrote at the time, over in Kislev. And there's a host of companies, all of which have got their own masters, and above those is a grandmaster, and they are one fighting force, and they're all underneath Ar-Ulric. He's got one of the biggest armies in the Old World at his beck and call. Now, typically, they're supporting different armies of the Empire, but not always. And these Knights of the White Wolf are influential. Ar-Ulric controls them. He also controls all the temples of Ulric, and some of those are a lot more fragmented and unexpected. And unlike all the other cults of the Empire, where they are split up into lots of different orders, all of which do different things, all of which are largely autonomous, there's only a single order of priests in the cult of Ulric, the order of, the Howling Wolf. That's it. So you've got the order of the Knights of the White Wolf and the order of the Howling Wolf. That's the priests. The priests are all celibate, the knights are not. And it's super common for knights to be knights, do their thing, have children, and then become a priest, particularly when they're getting a bit older, and have an entire family. That's how we've got an entire, almost dynasty of Valgirs working in Middenheim. They become knights, and then they move over and become priests. Now, I disagree with some of the writing that was made for the White Wolves in the Middenheim book, largely because, for example, one of the Valgirs was made bald, shaving his head. No Ulrican worth his salt would ever shave his head. They don't do that. Ulricans let their hair grow. But for some reason, they've decided to make him bald. Wasn't entirely happy with that. I'd rather he was just bald because he was bald. That would have been cool. But no, he shaved his head. Rubbish. So there is a ton of temples across the Empire. All of these temples have a high priest. And the high priest is responsible for raising the local Knights of the White Wolf and for basically going to war locally and helping them do their thing. And all of these high priests have often got a den father, a deputy high priest, and a bunch of priests under them and initiates. And they are all trained for war. There is not a single member of the cult of Ulric that is not trained to fight. They are all trained to fight. And the initiates are the initiates of both orders, which again is rare for cults of the Empire. Most cults of the Empire have initiates that might go into some orders, but each order tends to have initiates that will then go into their own orders. A sister order in the cult of Sigmar, they just take in female initiates that they themselves train, where the initiates are trained, and then if they're particularly well spoken or they would make better priests, they are shunted off in that direction, sworn to celibacy, where others are sent over towards the White Wolves. And to become a White Wolf, you have to go through initiation. And initiation is learning about Ulric and an awful lot of the core details of what priests need to learn. It's all much more meshed together than some of the other cults. And all of these priests are trained to war, and they are found in fortified locations across the north. Ar-Ulric controls all of them. Every single last one of them. And they have a hierarchy which is super simple. It's him, it's the local high priest at a temple, and whatever they do, and that is it. When Ar-Ulric dies, all of the high priests are summoned up to Middenheim to effectively choose their next member. They're given a time limit to get up there, everybody's informed, everybody goes up, new Ar-Ulric is made. All of that's necessary to understand that he has been a core character in the Empire and war forever, since the founding of the Empire, some 2,500 years earlier. If you want to win a war, having Ar-Ulric on side means you will win the war, probably, because he can bring to bear so many forces from across the Empire. And it is far, far more than most appreciate or realize. Ar-Ulric is a stupendously powerful figure. He is arguably more powerful than most of the elector counts. And that's something that's easy to forget. And with power comes what this question is discussing: secrets. And those secrets are deep and broad. So they're broad in that he is in contact with most of the other cults, most of the other primary bloodlines of the Empire. He is being asked to make deals with them all the time. He'll be aware of some of their secrets. He is broadly a figure of honor. That's how Ulric works. Honor is a core principle of being in the cult of Ulric, and being duplicitous and lying is not in his remit. He literally should never lie, ever. That's Ar-Ulric. But that doesn't mean he can't keep secrets. That doesn't mean that he won't make an oath. I won't tell anyone this. But he will say, I'm not discussing that. I'm not doing those things. Just because you don't lie doesn't mean you can't do stuff. It is worth noting, though, the cult of Ulric has another component to it, which is willing to do an ambush. An ambush is basically when you lie on the battlefield and pretend you're not there and jump out. Ambushes are fine. They're super Ulrican. Ulrican ambushes are very common. Guerrilla warfare with Ulricans is common, but it then turns into personal conflict, where your surprised opponents will hopefully get a chance to hold off against themselves. But the surprise ambush is a core component of how Ulric thinks. They're happy to ambush, and the ambushing includes politically. The cult of Ulric as a whole can ambush unsuspecting enemies of the future, for example, by potentially turning sides, but they won't break their word. They won't do anything else. One of the core goals of anyone who's dealing with the cult of Ulric is to get them to give their word to do something. Now, does the cult of Ulric itself have its own secrets? Because what we say there, all of that is just to say that they are aware of secrets for most of the bloodlines at one point or another, and it'll be recorded in their annals, because the cult of Ulric has all of that. And holy crap, someone else is bringing it up. I've discussed this multiple times. I am not going to go into it again. Let's just say it's my kid's fault. Anyway, I'm moving back now. Where was I? I've lost. Was it that one? Yes. The last point that I'll bring up in this one is the cult has its own secrets as to who Ulric is, the fact that he is an existing god that wanders the world, the fact that it has extremists that will banned by the cult extremists that will also pay attention to Ar-Ulric if he requests it, meaning that there is links between Ar-Ulric and the children of Ulric, the sons of Ulric, that are denied because they're not true. There is no formal link, but are wholly true, in that if he demanded that all the children of Ulric follow him, they would, because they very strongly believe in the cult of Ulric and everything it represents, but they're extremists off to the side. Not officially part of the cult. But we've also got the story of who Ulric is. What gods did he meet when he was back in the era when the gods were in the Warhammer world and were doing shit all the time? What's his relationship with the Chaos gods that he goes to war with? What's the relationship with his bestest bud, giant white wolf, who is eventually going to eat the sun? Because, hey, there's never a Norse a religious point that we're not willing to steal. There's lots of stuff. The truth that he is the guardian of is, if I was to sum it up, the truth of the cult of Ulric. And yeah, I can dive into that in far more depth than I would do. We're doing an almost stream because we're near the end of this one and I don't care. Why Ar-Ulric and not Ulric or Ulric? Because that's the term they decided to choose. Ar-Ulric means son of Ulric. That's literally what it means. You'll find that there's a bunch of names in Warhammer which also riff on this. Almost all of them were added by me. So if you find a character that says it's called, say, Ar-Eldric, that's actually saying son of Eldric. It's somewhat similar to the Scottish use of Mac, where they'll say MacDonald, son of Donald. Mackay, son of Kai. You get the idea. And for those of you that have the name Mackay and you're over in America and call it Mackay, that is not how we pronounce it in Scotland. It's Mackay. In the same way that we don't pronounce, say, I don't know. I don't want to get caught up in pronunciation games. We'll be here all day. Moving over here, Ricky Chapman. This episode, we've been having a role-playing PTSD of when Ar-Ulric kicked our faces in during a Skaven campaign, Rip Squexlet, who was thrown into the flame of Ulric. Oh, bummer. I was instantly skilled, but his ashes still coat the floor. Love it. Ar-Ulric should always be, even if he's an old man in modern versions of the cult, a genuine threat to almost anything, because he is the living representation of Ulric's will, and unlike first edition versions of Ar-Ulric, where he was just an old man, a high priest, the new version of Ulric is he is literally first chosen of Ulric. When an Ar-Ulric is chosen by the entire cult, it is seemingly presumed that Ulric agrees and he gains significant blessings. This was confirmed repeatedly, particularly during the 6th edition of Warhammer Fantasy Battle. So yeah, even if we've got ourselves an ancient looking old dude with a beard that's sitting all the way down to his knees, and he's sitting there ready to go, I'm going to kill you now, and you're like, ha ha ha, yeah, that's never going to happen. He will tear you to fucking shreds, and that's part of the fun, right? Moving down, yeah, what a filter, fuck me. Do you get skipped? Just don't get skipped. Let me just quick back up there, Eshin Squirrel, because I don't like the idea that anyone got skipped. Okay, I'm not seeing your one, Eshin Squirrel. I'm not seeing anything from Eshin Squirrel. I got skipped. Did you get skipped? Did you get skipped? Did you get skipped? Did you get skipped? Did you get... Where's the comment I skipped? Okay, I'm not seeing one on this side, which is deeply annoying, Eshin. I'm going to scroll really far back. If anyone can see it, can you ping it over to me? Because I'll be damned if I miss one, because that's just rude. I'm now halfway through, 3/4 through. I'm not seeing any super chats back there with your name on it. And the only ones I'll definitely pull up are those. I don't see it. But if anyone else can find it, because I really do not like the idea of missing one. If you're supporting the channel, I will always, always, always support you. And apologies if I have skipped it. I don't see it. It was after the QR one. Let's have a quick check. All right, Mount Lair. Was that right? Episode. Ah! I'm blind! That'll be why I have glasses. Let's pretend I wasn't wearing them. What an idiot. Speaking of secrets, what is the official Games Workshop reason Knights Panther protect the Tallbringers? I'm coming up blank for my own game. There isn't one. So this is a point of contention amongst some of the writers. And holy shit, look, I've got... If I get this right, I can get no wrinkles in my forehead. Wait a minute. Wrinkle-free! I'm 20 again! Stupid filter. I'm full of wrinkles. Like, loads of them. There isn't one. When I was commissioning the Middenheim book, there was a problem that had to be addressed. And that's that Games Workshop have presented different versions of the Knights Panther. The original version of the Knights Panther from Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay 1st Edition has them being basically under the graph. And they wander out into the woods, they kill mutants, and that's it. There's not much of a story there. We don't need to worry too much. The Knights Panther got massively changed in Warhammer, and they became the largest secular knightly order in the world. They're huge. And they had chapter houses in most cities in the Empire, and Araby, and down the edge of Estalia, and Bretonia. They had a whole trading fleet. They had sister orders like the Knights Jaguar. They were huge, massive, and immensely rich from the trade empire that they held. They were effectively, in their modern writing, a little bit like the Teuton Knights and everything that they'd managed to pull together, assuming that I'm not getting the wrong name for them there. And they're all over, from Araby all the way up to the Empire. And only a small group of them were actually underneath the control of Boris Todbringer. And I built that into the pitch and write-up for the Middenheim book. And I said, this has to be covered. We have to have a group and explaining that they are separate. Boris controls them, and bluntly, he has something over them. And that's why the Grand Master is in Middenheim. And that's why the inner circle all center up there. And the other masters and the other chapter housers are completely separate from what's happening there. And I wrote into it, you can tell the difference between the Knights Panther who are Middenheim based and serving Boris, because they have a crown sitting above the Knight Panther head. The ones without the crowns aren't serving Boris. They're just normal Knights Panther doing their Knights Panther thing. And Knights Panther are used not just in their own trading stuff, they're often used as a bodyguard for ambassadors. Look at the Ambassador Chronicles. You'll see a fine example of that. 20 of them are stationed with the ambassador over in Kislev in that book. Knights Panther are basically one of the largest knightly orders who are not attached to any religion at all, though Sigmar is quite important to them, and they're far beyond their initial write-up. And I had a secret for what it was, but I didn't intend to write it into the book because it was for my games, and also I don't like tying Games Workshop's hands because they might want to deal with it. I then left the company that was creating the roleplay books, leaving Dave, who was writing that book, to come up with whatever he wanted with the commission that I'd done. And then he wrote what you'll find in the current Middenheim book. So the actual answer for this is there isn't one. That's it. There just isn't one. I created the situation to make sense of the disparate versions of the background, and I didn't give a reason in-game for why it is the case. So, yeah. Now, coming up and buying for your own game, I'm not going to give you what it is in Lawhammer because it's a genuine spoiler. We've got a Knights Panther in our game, Birdie. She's one of the characters. And she has sworn the oath to protect Boris Todbringer. And she knows the truth of what Boris has over them. And it's such a big thing that I haven't told Kath what it is, because I know Kath very likely might mention it or make reference to it or change her actions subconsciously because of knowing what it is, where Birdie won't, her character. So I've not even told Kath, much to Kath's abject annoyance and disappointment, because she wants to know. At one point, we will flash back to her oath, the oath that she's made as a Knights Panther, and anyone who watches our streams will find out what we do for our game. But at the moment, all I can say is there's no official answer. You are left with answers that's 100% your own game. Right, so we did all these, didn't we? So apologies for missing that one, Eshin Squirrel. That is just a crime. I felt really bad. Speaking of secrets, yeah, we got that one there. Bonus question about the subject. Dragon Ogres, oh. What might the Dragon Emperor say about them? Interesting question. It's almost certainly to be deeply, deeply negative. We recently uploaded, in fact, I'm going to get the link to this because I think this was great. The entire, let me just pop over to the videos, Lorebeards, that's the one. My videos, and let's go grab out the link to this one. Here we go, Lorebeards Trimmed, get shareable link. If you're looking for a quick short watch, and I do mean quick by our standards, this is only half an hour, and it's all of the lore that we dropped about Dragon Ogres in trimmed form from the Dragon Ogres stream we did, which was over 3 hours long. It's been trimmed right down to you just get the core component parts. Lorebeards Trimmed is great, and we love the idea. We'd like to do more, but it's super expensive for us to do because we have to hire an editor to dive in, edit the entire video, and make it look cool. And the Lorebeards Trimmed is that. We'd love to do more, but we need a bajillion more views to make this financially worthwhile for us. We're probably going to do 2 or 3 or so of them and just take the cost on the chin to begin with. And we're hoping we get more views for them, because if we get enough people watching them, we will just make them a regular feature, and that will take all of our Lorebeards shows and we will trim them down. So if you want to just have a quick deep dive into the lore over any particular part, you can do so. So all the super chats are cut out. Our chat about whatever we're doing next week is cut out. My chat about going to Norway, for example, cut out. And it's just down to things. So the Dragon Ogres part's there. And if we're to cut a long story short, Dragon Ogres are now Chaos Worshippers, and that's it. So they are pre-cataclysm as a species, much like the dragon. The Dragon Ogres didn't get on anyway. It's almost certain to say that he is deeply against them and would love to see them all killed. But as you'll note from that stream, that might be an easier thing to say than actually do. Okay, I missed one again? Seriously? Is it Ricky Chapman's one? Please tell me it's that one, because I've missed another one. I'm just going to cry. Okay, let's get going. Also, an interesting thing, all of the Warpstone tokens and Warpstone-based poisons were unharmed by the flames when Slit went through the flame. Oh, when it went through the flame, so you decided the Warpstone wasn't affected by it and then just passed through to the other side. I like that. That's a fun detail. And it also speaks to what Warpstone is in your version of Warhammer. One thing that I've discussed a lot about in the past when we were discussing Warhammer is that there is an objective Warhammer. That is all of the books that have been released by Games Workshop for Warhammer. And whilst they may be contradictory and whilst they may have lots of weirdness in them, they are Warhammer. But what we play at home, the games that we present at home, aren't. Because we don't know everything Games Workshop's produced, and we also have tastes. And there's things that we like. So we only present the bits that we really like most, and we ignore the bits we don't. And on top of that, we embellish and add to create cool stories. That's what roleplay games are designed for. For example, they're all about creating your own version of a story within someone else's world. That's the primary reason that we call our stream game online Lawhammer, because it's Andy Law's version of Warhammer. It's not the real Warhammer, and indeed, the second we start playing and new characters are introduced, it starts diverging from the canon world relatively strongly. I can happily say now, at about 150 episodes, our world, not just because of the new elements I've added to make sense of our story, but our world is no longer the canon world because certain characters have done things that the canon characters didn't. Meaning they've done different things and everything's beginning to diverge in an interesting way. I am super interested to see how our campaign ends. For those of you who are currently watching Lawhammer, we're just at the point that, and again, I'm going to be as spoiler-free as I can be, the conclusion of the campaign is coming. The conclusion of our campaign is not anything close to the written version, but it strongly revolves around one thing, which I don't think should be a shock to anyone, given it's a Warhammer campaign, the Warhammer. And the Warhammer in our version of the campaign is fucking mental. And where that Warhammer goes is going to completely change everything. In the real version of Warhammer, the Warhammer goes to Karl Franz. I don't know if that'll happen in our game. And if it doesn't, our empire is going to be completely different. And I hope that it is. But equally, if the players head off in the Karl Franz direction, then it won't be. And it currently stands, it looks like Karl Franz might be getting it. I don't know. It's going to be super cool. So, yeah, I do love individual expressions of how things work in the Warhammer world, like how Warpstone tokens can pop up in different ways. Right, moving down to Necro Player. It must be odd to be the god followed by a god that most of your followers also follow, especially in a setting where those gods are real and can be talked to. Yes. So the god, Ulric, followed by a god, Sigmar, who most of your followers also follow Sigmar, especially if that's the god's real and can be talked to. Yeah, it's an interesting one. The nature of gods in the Warhammer world are poorly defined, but deep. And whether Ulric and Sigmar has a chat is you know, a thing. Andy, says friend or traitor, a vagabond on my travels has said this. The world is so violent because all in it are infected by the warlike spore of greenskins. Thoughts? So, I use in my version of the Warhammer world, so Lawhammer, the spores and fungal infections in a variety of ways. But I don't do that. And I don't do that because it doesn't seem to be true. In that the connection, the mycelial network, if you prefer, of the orcs is quite personal to them. And I am not certain that it does anything more, because the world is so violent, because life is violent. People are shit. That's real world. We don't need an excuse for it by saying it's gods or greenskins. The world is already that. But they're a world where there's so much more as well, which means that violence is dialed up to 11, to 12, to Warhammer. Because things like greenskins exist and all these others. I don't think this is the case. And I don't think trying to pass off the violence that is inherent in the various species of the Warhammer world as the influence of another species is a good theme to take, because in some respects it just dismisses the, particularly if you look at the human peoples around the world, their natural inclinations already. Now, I say those are natural inclinations. You'll get many who will say, no, humans are good folk at heart. Violence is only because of necessity. And the second you start diving into all of the philosophy of what is the human soul, you start justifying thoughts, not justifying others, but ultimately we have facts. And the facts are clean, regardless of what an individual might be like. As a group, wars are constantly happening all the time. And in the Warhammer world, there's more reasons for them. I don't think you need this. Now I'm going to contradict myself. Could you do that? You certainly could. In fact, it would make a great story. Could you use it on a local level? So, for example, an area that's already deeply enmeshed with spores all over the place because of long-term greenskin infestation. Could that then arise with a more warlike group around them, or some equivalent of Digonobs from Gorka Morka game in 40k? Yeah, sure, you definitely could. It's probably not my preference or inclination, because it's not the sort of story that I think benefits examinations into human nature, because in some respects it gives them an excuse to do the things that they would do anyway. It's a little bit like if you've ever played Vampire the Masquerade. Now, I'm going to go off on a slight tangent. In Vampire the Masquerade, during its second edition in particular, somewhat in its first edition, they had the concept of paths of humanity and paths in general, paths of enlightenment, where they would be given certain rules to keep their beasts in control. So vampires in Vampire the Masquerade are basically, imagine your mate, Bob. Okay, but Bob's got this hunger within him that makes him turn into a rage monster every once in a while. And you're trying to control the rage monster. And if you don't, you turn into a wight, you lose your mind completely, you go insane, and you become a blood-sucking beast that will be hunted down. And most vampires are trying to hold on to their humanity to keep off the beast. But they added the idea of paths of enlightenment. And too many of the paths of enlightenment were a set of rules of the paths of doing the shit I wanted to do. I can now just be an inhuman monster, and I get rewarded for it. So it ended up being doing the shit I wanted to do, and it provided excuses rather than delving often into the inhumanity that vampires could present and why they were presenting that way. And many of the paths were clumsily written. And this could fall into that area, something that ends up being relatively clumsy and turns into an excuse for people to do whatever the hell they wanted anyway and just become murder hobos. So this would be the murder hobo option for many people's games, which is fun as well, which is why I'm now contradicting myself. So dialing into that could be super fun. And also Necroplayer, someone else bringing it up. Yeah, I know. The filters are put on by my kids. And if you've been here since the beginning and pulled off that comment, fuck you. But if you haven't and you've just come at the end, then yes, my kids have, I think, fucked about with my camera settings, and I've yet to figure out which ones they played with. So yeah, I'm looking youthful today. Yeah, so it looks like we have that's an interesting question. I'm just going to catch it from Federico here. Andy, could you please add to Lawhammer lore stamps episodes to catch up with regular episodes of and intro episodes of how to watch Lawhammer? I'm not sure quite what you're asking for there. The easiest way of how to watch Warhammer is watch from the beginning, go all the way through. Yes, there's a lot of sound issues all the way through it because, hey, we've no fucking idea what we're doing, but we get better as we go. So that's the easiest. An intro episode. We do have a summation of the first 14 episodes. So you can watch that to skip like the first 14 episodes if you want, but you will miss a lot of detail. A lore stamp episode catch-ups. We don't really have catch-ups per se, but we are doing a bunch of summaries. The second set of summaries is almost there. So all of that is to say, not quite sure what you're asking for, but most of what you're asking for, it appears we don't really have. And if there's something you'd like us to have, dive into the Lawhammer side of Discord rather than the Lorebeards side of Discord and drop a quick list of things you think would be really useful. We've got a suggestions channel. Dive in there, drop in all your suggestions, and I will go with that. Let's see what Wesley says in that. The episodes are long, but so good thought. And if you rewatch stuff, Andy lays the groundwork for things in subtle detail real early. Yeah, I do. I literally had one of them pay off the other day, and it was super fun to see everyone go, oh! So yeah, that's super cool. And yes, the episodes are long, and there is a lot of material there. There's no doubt. We have... For those of you who don't know Lawhammer, there's two types of episodes. We have episodes and we have tales. Episodes are the week-by-week playing that we do with the whole party. Tales are individual stories that individual characters may be involved with. So it's just a one-on-one session between me and one person, or perhaps me and two people. And these tales are often examining side stories, little bits at the side, but they often set up things that are coming later. You could just watch the main episodes and never a tale, and you'd still pretty much catch up with everything. If you do that, we're only on episode 80. And I say only, each episode's an average of about 3 and 3.5 hours long. That's still a lot of viewing. But if you do watch all 150, you get a really big, fully featured tale involving all 6 of the PCs and also the history of the Empire, how it all got formed from an interesting start, a lot of discussion about Sigmar, a lot of discussion, even things like Miao Ying pops up all over the place. We've got lots of crazy stuff that happens in our games. It is a lot, though. I don't disagree. And we are building summaries. There is also a host of fan summaries out there that have been created by, in particular, 2 of the users over on Discord. I don't want to say his name wrong because I will. I just want to make sure it's definitely, let's go and get them. There we go. It's Schmidt and Daniel. It is Daniel, isn't it, Daniel? It's Daniel. Good. I was like, oh, am I going to pronounce it correctly? It's just Daniel and Schmidt, isn't it? So they've been working on it. They have done a summary of almost every episode. So you can read about all the episodes. And it's an immense amount of super awesome work that they've done. I can't thank them enough for the community notes that they've built together. We're also going to be doing some summary versions of that as well. So really curtailed versions that we're going to be dropping up onto World Anvil. If you don't know what World Anvil is, it's an online website where you can do world building and just present lore. It's really cool. I was just yesterday hosting the World Anvil events with the World Anvil Awards with Lindsay, my wife, and Janet, who runs World Anvil. She is the best. I love Janet to bits, Janet Forbes. And we hosted the World Anvil Awards showing some of the best new articles and ideas that have been put on World Anvil, where people are building their own versions of worlds. And we're going to be using World Anvil to hopefully summarize every single episode that you can see out there in a similar fashion to a wiki. So we've got that on our scheduled release plan. We'll see how well we actually get that into place. But yeah, there is a ton of cool stuff out there. Oh yeah. Just to bring this one up because it's fun. A really scary, powerful halfling in a side story who's amazing. I love that guy so much, and I kind of wish that we could use him more, but he's from 2,500 years ago. That was a long, long time ago. And as Dragon Magic says, it's a long time ago since we're in Shadows over Bergenhafen. For those of you that don't know the Enemy Within, Shadows over Bergenhafen is basically in the first part of the campaign. The first book, what do we call it in the end? I always keep on forgetting what we called it. Shadows, Enemy in Shadows. That's what we called it. Enemy in Shadows. The first book of the Enemy Within campaign, Enemy in Shadows, includes Shadows over Bergenhafen, which is one of the first adventures of the Enemy Within. And it was we finished it by about episode 8, I think. We're now in episode 80, obviously, but we're 3 years later. We intended to finish the game last year, but we had some major issues throughout the course of the end of the year. Then my dad died. Everything's gone weird. So we're finishing it off this year. I imagine we'll finish at around about episode, I'm going to guess about 88. Somewhere around there. That's probably where it'll go. Or there'll be a big kickoff at episode 88. We're just about heading to episode 82, I think, next week. So we're really close to the end of this campaign. And when we do the second campaign, which is going to be Pass of the Old One, Pass of the Old One's campaign is based on an adventure that I wrote with Gav Thorpe. Mentioned Gav Thorpe several times in this stream. He was the writer of a good chunk of Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay 6th edition. Gav Thorpe and I were going to be writing an entire campaign for Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay. We wrote the whole thing out. We had it all beat by beat sorted. I resigned from being the producer for Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay, so we never wrote it fully. But I've still got everything. And I asked Gav, do you mind if I run this campaign too? And Gav was like, yeah, go. That'd be awesome. It would be great to see it come alive. I'd love to see that happen. So we are going to be doing that later. Okay. Wow. Have we reached the end? There doesn't appear to be any more comments coming in. I was intending to finish it around about 1 hour 20. We're now at 2 hours and 8 minutes. So assuming that no other comment comes in within the next 2, 3, 4, 5 seconds, I would like to say thank you very much for everyone that supported the stream. It is always deeply appreciated. We will be moving on to our Ar-Ulric stream pretty soon. I'm assuming next Saturday now. I'm not going to pick up the question that just came in. It's not a super chat because it's a good one though. We're going to be picking that up. We're going to be doing a stream next Tuesday. Not sure what yet. Ryan and I will get together and we'll decide what we're doing on the Tuesday. I'm really looking forward to doing that one in particular because it's just, I love the Tuesday streams because we're never quite sure where we're going to end up. They're just fun, unlike our Sunday streams, which are lore focused and we directly deal with a single subject. Our Wednesday ones can go almost anywhere and we can do almost anything. So I'm looking forward to Wednesday. And I will also, just to make sure that we don't forget this, I will also bring up with Ryan on the Tuesday what was requested by Zedron, who who requested that our next Age of Sigmar one cover dwarves. I think that's a really good idea, particularly because I'm also super fascinated to see what has been done with them broadly and specifically. And I don't know, screw you. Who is Moonclaw? Go watch our Moonclaw stream. So our Moonclaw stream dives into this, but it is worth noting that Moonclaw is also mentioned inside Lawhammer, which is where a lot of where the Who is Moonclaw comments, we've got quite a number of Who is Claw and Who's Moon and Claw. And it's a core plot point that has yet to be discussed inside Lawhammer, but I will say that Moonclaw will be turning up at some point, and who he is does matter, and what he is going to become also matters. So yeah, that is a core component. If you don't know who Moonclaw is, go check out Lorebeards' channels. I don't know if this one's, is Moonclaw on my channel or Sotek's? It might be on Lawhammer, it might be on Loremaster of Sotek. Just do Moonclaw Lorebeards and you'll find it. And we did an entire thing, but Moonclaw is part of our campaign. And in the words of Lord Vaughan, see you later, Andy Babyface Law. I don't look as fucking old as I currently am. Oh, fucking hell. Who is Moonclaw? No, sorry. How is Moonclaw? I am so tempted to just gently tease a little bit of this one because the answer to this is a core thing for how we're presenting him in Lawhammer. And the how is Moonclaw is directly related to the episode where he popped in. It's not just that Moonclaw was dropped for no reason. Something occurred in that episode which is a direct answer to how is Moonclaw and how we're doing it. I'm not sure what episode that was, but I'm going to take a guess that it was the episode that had the star sign for its graphics. I remember doing the star sign. Now, if you don't know, Warhammer has got a whole host of its own constellations. I made these up for the Tome of Salvation, and they've been represented and duplicated in a couple of places for the different star signs. And I'm pretty sure it was that episode where I did one of the star signs that I created. I'm pretty sure that's the Moonclaw episode. I will just double check. I think it's as above, so below. Yeah, I'm pretty sure it's this one. For those of you who are interested in rewatching or go checking that one out again, I'm pretty sure it's this one, which is episode 67, I think. Or you've got it 68, perhaps. 68 is Dragonborn. It could be that one. Is it that one? Okay, I'll take your word for it because Eshin seems to think it's 68. So that being the case, I'll drop that one up as well. That's the one that's got a shareable link. That's the one that instead of having the constellation of a dragon, has an old piece of art for Miao Ying as the cover for it. Yeah, that's fun. So all of that is to say, thank you all so very much for turning up. I'm going to go off and have myself some tea. I'm currently on a diet. Probably that diet alone is what has given me the smooth face that you see, this clean visage, which definitely isn't a filter my kids come in. So the common hit in 67, Moonclaw was mentioned in 68. Thank you very much for confirming that, Eshin Squirrel. Couldn't remember off the top of my head. All the episodes blur together for me. Well, you've got both links to where the comet hits in 67 and 68, where Moonclaw apparently appears. I'm going to pop off and just have myself a lovely bit of food. Not worry about the fact that I've got a ton of weight to lose, because when I was in Norway and Sweden and Denmark, to hark back to the very beginning of this episode, I put on 7 kilos. Now that's pretty much, well, it's not as much of my weight as I'd like to admit, but it's too much. I put on too much weight. I'm diabetic. I can't be this heavy. So I've got quite a lot of weight to lose, which means I sadly have at least 2 months worth of pretty solid dieting ahead of me because of about a month of travel. I get what I deserve, I suppose. But right now, I'm starving. And after I've eaten, I'm probably still going to be starving. And with that all said, thank you all so much. You are all the best. I will see you next time, hopefully alongside Ryan. Until then, ta-ta, bye-bye. As long as I remember how to end the stream.